Um, my name is Katie Blake, and I am a regional or conservationist at Heisted. We are a regional conservation nonprofit based in Reading, Connecticut. In my role at Heisted, I support the work of regional conservation partnerships, or RCPs, in their efforts to increase the pace and scale of conservation across the Northeast. So this webinar, the conservation applications of Ebird data and products, will dive deeper into the data behind Ebird. I'm getting all these pop-ups in my window here. And this is the second of our 2 webinars. And last week's webinar, entitled The Power of Ebird, Using Information on Birds to Amplify Conservation, Stewardship, and Community Outreach, looked at what Ebird is and how it can be used to increase capacity and inspire engagement. So next slide. So this webinar series is brought to you by the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative, represented here by the incredibly diverse suite of participating partners. The Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative is a collaborative effort between the regional conservation partnerships and their partners, Audubon Groups, Heisted, and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. The goal of this initiative is to help RCPs connect with bird conservation in ways that expand their efforts, their partnerships, and ecological priorities. This group also aims to raise awareness and collective knowledge about the importance of bird conservation and the role that RCPs and landowners can play in protecting and restoring habitats for declining populations. Heisted supports this initiative by serving as a co-leading organization along with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. I serve as the co-lead along with my partner, Sarah Barker, who's the program director for the Cornell Land Trust Bird Conservation Initiative. Sarah was also one of our presenters during last week's webinar and is in attendance today to help answer some questions. Our initiative received a grant that has allowed us to put on this webinar series specifically geared toward RCP and land trust leaders in order to bring you the tools that you need for your conservation planning and community outreach efforts. Next slide. I'd like to make a plug for another program that the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative is organizing later in the fall. It's a 4-part Forestry for the Birds webinar series. It's being led by Audubon Vermont and other conservation experts from across the Northeast. And the series will explore how to integrate best practices in silviculture and forestry management for birds in New England with a focus on at-risk species. And each webinar will cover a different topic, such as habitat requirements and management practices, bird-related forestry strategies for landowners, and there will be a review of the various technical and financial resources that are available. And this series will be geared toward RCP leaders and their partners, land trust staff, foresters, woodland managers, and others. So stay tuned for more information. We're going to be setting the time and have more of a schedule for you, and I'll make sure to email all the registrants of this series about that one. So next slide. So for today's program, I'll be turning it over to our presenters in just a moment. There'll be 2 presentations followed by about 10 or 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. And at that point, you can use the chat to put your question or raise your hand option just to unmute and ask the question yourself. Next slide. So I'd now like to turn it over to our presenters for today, Jenna Curtis and Orrin Robinson. Jenna Curtis is a project leader for Ebird. Jenna's focus is on communications outreach and engaging with the global Ebird community. She prepares informational content for Ebird across a variety of public platforms. Jenna also assists with coordinating Ebird's team of volunteer reviewers. Her favorite part of the job is helping others to build skills and develop a deeper appreciation for nature through birds. Orrin Robinson is a research associate in the Center for Avian Population Studies at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. The overarching theme of his research is using and developing quantitative tools to make use of large ecological data sets in order to learn about vertebrate population and community ecology. Ultimately, the goal is to apply the lessons learned to vertebrate conservation. So I'd now like to turn it over to Jenna.
Thanks so much, Katie, and welcome back, everyone. Good to see you again. So in this presentation, as Katie said, we're going to be discussing the conservation applications of Ebird data and products. In today's webinar, we're going to show you where to go to access raw Ebird data and modeled data products. And Orrin's going to discuss what factors the Ebird science team takes into account when using Ebird data, especially when integrating it with other data sources. Orrin is also going to provide a walkthrough of the different types of Ebird status and trends products and how to use and interpret them. And throughout this entire presentation, we'll be providing some real-world examples of how both raw and processed Ebird data can be used to implement conservation actions, plan and assess management, and monitor bird populations. So you're interested in working with Ebird data. It's important to know first that there are two types of Ebird data. There's raw data, which is a spreadsheet of Ebird observations. If you want something like latitude and longitude coordinates or other types of information about the actual reports that people are submitting to Ebird, raw data is what you need. But there are also Ebird status and trends data, sometimes referred to as Ebird science products. These are modeled outputs, which take raw Ebird data and other external data sets and process them to create predictions of things like distributions, abundances, and species habitat associations over continental scales. Orrin is going to talk more about status and trends data and how it is created and how you can use it in a bit. For now, it's important to know that status and trends are processed data outputs, whereas the raw data are actual Ebird reports. So I'm going to start here with we're going to start with the Ebird raw data. So in order to obtain the Ebird raw data, you're going to want to go to the Ebird website, log in under your account, scroll down to the bottom of the page, and here's a link to request data. Again, that's at the bottom of any Ebird page. Just click request data. You'll be asked to submit a request access form here in order to access the Ebird basic data set. If you click that link, you'll be taken to a short form where you'll fill out some information about yourself and your project and how you plan on using Ebird data, which we use for monitoring and keeping track of where the data is being used and how it's being used for grant purposes. Once you've submitted this form, it takes about 3 to 5 business days to receive approval. Once you've got that, you'll be able to return to that request data page. And instead of seeing a blue lock, you'll see a green unlocked icon, which gives you access to the form that you can see here. This is where you will actually request the raw data. You're able to either download the entire data set if you have 90 spare gigabytes available, but most often you're going to want a custom download for either a specific species that you want data for, a particular region, or a date range. The smallest region that you can download data for is the county level. So if you have particular sites or a region that you're interested within a county, you're going to need to download data for that entire county and then further filter the records yourself. We'll talk about this more in a bit. If you find that even when downloading records for an entire county, you have an exceptionally large data set, something that may be too large to open in Excel, I recommend further subsetting each download by a particular date range. So for example, request data from 2000 to 2010, then from 2010 to 2020. Each of these requests will come as a separate file, which you can then process and combine yourself. The data will be delivered via email as a zipped text file. If you're not familiar with text or tab delimited files, these are just like a CSV file. They can easily be opened and read in Excel and other data processing programs. I'll show you quickly here, but know that there are easily accessed detailed instructions for opening .txt files online if you're new to that format. Just Google open TXT file and you'll get some results. Once you've done that, here is raw Ebird data. These data consist of confirmed Ebird reports, that is, records that were not flagged for review, plus any flagged records that have been accepted by a volunteer review. Any records that were unusual for the date and location that were flagged and then subsequently unconfirmed by an Ebird reviewer are not included. Reports of Ebird sensitive species, something we discussed last week, are also excluded from this downloadable data, but you can write in to request those. Another thing you may have noticed about that download form was that there are a checkbox for unvetted data. This is also known as provisional data. And what that includes are any flagged records, things that were unusual for that date and location that have not yet been reviewed. You should take those with a little bit of caution because they haven't been evaluated by a volunteer expert from that region and might not be correct. They've been flagged because there's something unusual about them. Unvetted data will also include any records that were flagged and hidden from the database as being an introduced or exotic species, something that's non-native and not established in the area and was removed because it's probably an escapee, a domestic bird, something like that. So if you're interested in things like escaped peacocks for any reason, you might want to include the unvetted data because that's where those records are. When you download the data, the provisional or unvetted data is going to be in a separate data file from the confirmed public records. But again, you can merge those as you need. Note that in the raw Ebird data, you've got the common name and the scientific name, as well as some subspecies information. This is also where you get those latitude and longitude coordinates right here so that you can import this .txt file or any process records from it into a geospatial program. So it's pretty easy for things like ArcGIS, Google Maps, etc., to read and open latitude and longitude coordinates from a spreadsheet like this so that you can get raw Ebird observations into a map. Note that the latitude and longitude coordinates correspond to the location of the checklist, not the individual observations. This means that every single observation on a checklist will have the same coordinates because that's the coordinates of the checklist location. There's no current way to get coordinates for each individual bird or sighting on a checklist. You'll also note that the raw Ebird data does not contain observer names. Instead, it has anonymized observer codes. And that's because we need to align with international and some state data privacy regulations. If you feel like you need observer names for some reason, please reach out to me. Again, my email address will be provided as part of this webinar series. Please reach out to me. I can get you that data if you need it. As you can see, there are a lot more fields in these data. The download email you receive, in addition to having the raw observations, will also include a metadata file with definitions for all these data columns. So say that you've downloaded the raw data for a single county, and now you need data for just one or two locations within that county, maybe a single property that you're interested in the observations for. Within the raw data, you'll see that there is a locality ID column, and next to it, a locality type. The locality type indicates whether something is a personal location, or P, or a hotspot, which is an H. For hotspots, you can go to the Ebird Hotspot Explorer, which I'll show here, open any Hotspot Explore page, and the URL of that Hotspot Explore page contains the locality ID. This ID that I've highlighted right here matches the locality ID column in the raw data. For personal locations, you'll only be able to look up locality IDs that you or your Ebird account has data for. For those, go to My Ebird and click Manage Locations. Then click on any of your personal locations to get the locality ID in the URL, similar to just what I showed with a hotspot. Filtering your raw data by locality ID will help you subset these observations for a particular property, or you can filter by a set of properties. And in some ways, that's a little easier than trying to set a polygon or limits around latitude and longitude. If you have existing survey data from outside of Ebird, you may find that the common names or scientific names you're using in the raw Ebird data don't necessarily match up with what's provided in the Ebird basic data set or with the survey data that you already have from other sources. The full Ebird taxonomy is available online on the Ebird science page under Use Ebird Data. And if you scroll down to the Ebird taxonomy, you can also Google the Ebird taxonomy to get the same result. The Ebird Taxonomy allows you to match up. You can download the spreadsheet and match up the common and scientific names used in the raw Ebird database with any other scientific names or common names you're using. While we're on the Ebird Science page, this is also, if you go back to Ebird Science, this is also where you will download Ebird status and trends data. Orrin is about to discuss these products in more detail, but if you want to use and explore them yourself, just click on Ebird status and trends, and then here, download data products. Status and trends products are available in tabular form. The range maps are available as geospatial layers. And for those of you who are more advanced analysts, you can also get the data through R. So now I'm going to switch over to Orrin to discuss the potential applications for these data and also the status and trends data. So take it away, Orrin.
All right, thanks. All right, I'm going to turn my camera off just because I've been having issues with Zoom recently. So, all right, so like Jenna said, I'm gonna talk a little bit or a lot about some conservation applications of Ebird and the status and trends products. I'm going to start with the Ebird Raw Data. Talk about some of the things you got to think about when you're using that data, and then show you some examples of real on-the-ground conservation applications of using Ebird data, and then I'll do the same with status and trends. So this is the end product of what most of us think about when we think about bird conservation, right? Where are the birds? When are they there? And how many of them are there? But before we get here, using Ebird raw data, which was used to make this map we're looking at here, there are a lot of things we've got to consider. So again, we're going to talk about raw Ebird data right now and how we can use this in applied conservation. Jenna talked last week about a lot of the questions of data quality in Ebird, about the review process and the filters. She mentioned some of those again today. Once you have that filtered, cleaned data set that you've downloaded, there's still some things you have to consider. There are things like temporal bias. People tend to go birding on holidays or on the weekend or during spring migration. So you have a lot more data from certain times of the year and certain years than you do from others. Spatial bias is the same idea there, but with space, right? People are going to want to bird close to home, close to roads, in easily accessible areas, places where they know there's going to be, a good chance to see a lot of birds. And then there's class imbalance. If you're working with a rare or difficult to detect species, you may have to worry about class imbalance in the data. That's a bird that would be very underrepresented in the Ebird data. And then there's observer bias to consider. And that's just the idea that there are, millions of people using Ebird data, and the experience level of all of those people is going to be different. So one of the things you can begin to do with Ebird data as soon as you get it is start to account for the detection of species. How variation in detection is handled is we can trim things like the distance traveled on a checklist or the time spent birding, the number of observers in the group. We know all of these things affect the detection process. And what you're doing here is if you trim and keep only checklists that spend a certain amount of time birding and only birded over a certain distance, or even limit it to stationary checklists, which are basically, point counts. What you're doing is imposing a structure on the data. And this is one of the first ways we start to make this citizen science data easier to use. Then we consider spatial sampling. So essentially we would just plop a grid over the area of concern, put all the Ebird data on that grid, and then from within each grid cell, sample one checklist or two checklists, right? And that starts to alleviate our spatial bias. If we did this grid sampling for every week or every month or season or something like that, that would also start to alleviate temporal bias as well. Talked a little bit about observer bias too, right? There's differing levels of skill among Ebird observers. And that's not to say we can't use everybody's data. We absolutely can. But we need to account for the observer bias in this data, right? We've done studies. We know how to quantify the experience or the expertise of people that are putting observations into Ebird. We also know that it has a large effect on the detectability of a lot of species, and that effect varies seasonally. We also know that including things like this improve our ability to parse out ecological or conservation relevant information from this data in our models. Excuse me. So I'm going to run through a few applications that we've done using the Ebird Raw Data. These are all very recent examples. First one I'll start with is tricolored blackbird. So tricolored blackbird is almost entirely restricted to California, mostly in the Central Valley of California. They're colonial nesters. They'll breed in these huge colonies, and they are nomadic in their life history, in that they do not come back to the same spot year after year to breed. So they're very hard to study because of that. And there's been some huge declines in this species. The species was petitioned to be listed under the California State Endangered Species Act, and it was denied because they did not have a formal population analysis demonstrating a decline. So we used Ebird data, and we combined Ebird with the nesting data that they had and the banding data that they had for these species into an integrated population model. And what we were able to show is that there's been a decline over the last 12 years or so of about 34%. So we've lost a third of those birds in the last 10 or 12 years. We were also able to show from that analysis that female adult survival and fecundity, which is just how many babies do you have, had the same effect on the growth rate, right? And that female adult survival was very high. So the adults were surviving well, the nests were not. So we were also able to tease out from this study that the conservation recommendation is to protect nesting habitat or protect the nests themselves from predation. And all of this was made possible because of the data that was in Ebird. There was no other good count data for this study. So when you're submitting Ebird checklists, you're contributing to studies like this. Excuse me. I'll talk about another study using raw Ebird data. This has to do with the bird returns project for the Nature Conservancy in Central Valley of California again. This is just a reverse auction where rice farmers submit bids to enroll in this program. Rice is typically flooded through harvest, and then the fields are kept flooded to help decompose stubble that is left from the harvest. And then they'll a lot of times will duck hunt over the flooded rice fields. And then after duck season, the water will be drawn down to the next growing season. And what this program does is compensate the farmers to leave the fields flooded after duck season through the time that shorebirds migrate through this area. So this map we're looking at is the northern part of the Central Valley in California where the program takes place. The darker of the two blues here is rice. So you can see there's a lot of rice up there. So in the enrolled fields the Nature Conservancy would go out and do point counts. They would even do some point counts in unenrolled fields. And we were able to combine Ebird data with their point count data from these smaller rice fields and expand the breadth of this analysis for shorebirds to the entire Central Valley and not just where they were doing their point counts. And what we found out is that, so what we're looking at here is maps of American avocet detection probability in the Central Valley. On the left is a map made of just Ebird data, and on the right is a map made of just the Nature Conservancy's point counts. We can see areas like here and through here and down in the south here. The Nature Conservancy's data is very good at predicting where they are, but not great at predicting where they aren't. And that's because within this data that the Nature Conservancy has, it's only from areas with good habitat. The model doesn't get a chance to learn what bad habitat looks like. The other side of that is that Ebird doesn't have a lot of data in it from these private rice fields. So the data that the Nature Conservancy is providing for private lands to Ebird fills a data gap in there. And when we combine this data, we get a much better map, right? We get a much more accurate model. And here you can see much hotter hotspots and cooler cool spots. So this is a good example of what combining, your
We may have lost Orrin.
Am I back?
Yes,
Where was I?
combining things.
We did that. We combined things. We combined the Ebird and TNC data. So combining these things led to much more accurate models. Did I talk about private lands?
I don't think so yet.
Okay, well, that was the take-home message there. So what happened was the Nature Conservancy's data was all from rice fields, whether they were enrolled or not. And these rice fields were all private. So there was no data in Ebird from all of these private lands. So when we combine the data from the private lands provided by the Nature Conservancy with Ebird, that data filled in a gap, and the model was able to learn what great and poor habitat looks like. So here, when we combine the data, we get much more accurate models. We get hotter hotspots, cooler cool spots. We ended up getting better, inference as well when we looked at habitat associations. So combining your point counts or your other surveys with Ebird data allows you to increase the extent of your study and allows for more accurate models.
Oh, we may have lost Orrin again.
Am I back?
You're back now.
All right. Sorry about this. This has been happening to me recently. So Bachman sparrows, they live in these longleaf pine ecosystems in the southeastern United States. They breed in the understory grasses and really need fire to keep the understory clear of stuff that likes to grow in there and replace these grasses. Some of the other species of note in this kind of habitat is our indigo snakes, gopher tortoises, red cockaded woodpeckers, and to a lesser extent, bobwhite. So this is a very important ecosystem in the southeastern United States. We've been working with the the Nature Conservancy in North Carolina and Tall Timbers Research Station and NIFWF on this project where we took data from prescribed burn areas in the nature in North Carolina and in North Florida from Tall Timbers, and combined that with Ebird data. And what we were able to show, we were able to take data from these small scale observations And what the point of doing this was to allow these groups, right, Tall Timbers and the Nature Conservancy in North Carolina, to evaluate these conservation actions in the context of the entire range of the population, right? You may be applying conservation to an area and seeing an increase in your species, but what does that mean at a population level? If you're just analyzing the data from one area, say in North Carolina here, and you see an increase, that doesn't tell you anything about the effect you're having in the context of the entire population. You may just be moving birds around rather than having some population level effect. And using Ebird with your own data can help you understand these things better. So now I'm going to talk about status and trends. And I have listed the status and trends team here just to give them their due. So over the last 15 years or so, Ebird has collected a lot of data. Jenna talked about how much data was in there last week. So for the status and trends, we, after filtering, like we've talked about, and all of those processing steps, we end up with about 20 million checklists at over 3 million locations that go into our Ebird status and trends products. And what those status and trends products are species range, occurrence, right? That's, you know, the probability of a species being present at a site, the abundance, and then the population trends.
Orrin froze again.
Sorry.
There you go.
Am I back?
Yep.
All right. So challenges. There are some challenges when trying to model this much data and make inference over such a large spatial extent, right? There's the ecological process. That's the process that connects species to a particular place at a particular time. There's the observation process, which we talked a little bit about when I first started talking about Ebird data and how we filter that to handle some of the biases that are in there. Then there's scaling, right? Both of these things vary regionally and seasonally, and this creates a lot of statistical and computational challenges. So to handle the ecological process, we use land cover variables like this from NASA. This is the MODIS land cover. Great product. Several different land classes, vegetative cover.
You froze again, Orrin. Shoot.
Am I back?
You're back.
All right. So we use this land cover data so we can do things like look at what is the effect of herbaceous wetland, the percent land cover, on marsh wren abundance, right? The models will learn these things and then tell us this. We have these intertidal mudflat. These are this land cover product is great for modeling shore.
Well, Orrin was meaning to say there was that the intertidal change layer of geospatial data is helpful for modeling shorebird data in particular. It can be very influential in how well the models can predict where shorebirds occur based on where intertidal data are available. Another layer that Orrin is about to discuss are open water layers and how well they do at helping to improve the resolution of our predictions for water birds like horned grebes, eared grebes, and ducks. Looks like we may have lost Orrin temporarily. Katie, if we need to, can you pull up Orrin's slides? Were you able to get those?
Yep, that might just take a couple of minutes here, but
yeah, no worries. I can explain the horned grebe It'll be great with some visualizations, but for now, picture a map of the United States. And here, I'll turn on my camera. Picture a map of the United States, and with all of the different habitat types that are available, and previous range maps for things like horned grebes cover a very large swath. That's a very broad brush painting of where horned grebes occur. But when you incorporate things like open water data, all of a sudden, instead of just brushing the grebes across the landscape, you can actually define the bodies of water in which they occur and stop predicting grebe distribution on areas such as dry land or terrestrial habitats where they don't actually occur. So the map gets a lot more refined. So that's kind of the advantage of using all of these external data sets to inform Ebird status and trends. And what makes them so reliable, accurate, and also useful is that instead of just using raw Ebird observations of where birds occur, status and trends actually take into account habitat factors so that they predict more broadly. Orrin, we just got past the horned grebe example. So if you could quickly maybe just show folks what the map without water data and the map with water data look like, and then we can move on to the trends information. Oh, did we lose him again?
Looks like it. Are you able to pull up the status and trends webpage? Maybe?
Yeah.
And in the meantime, maybe folks, if you have questions that have come up for you or that you have about the data that you came to the webinar with, I would encourage you to put them in the chat now, and we can.
Katie, Orrin's back, I think.
Yep.
For now.
Yeah, let's pop into the status and trends products themselves, Orrin.
Yeah, I think we missed this. Let's get to the good stuff here. All right, I'm gonna try to get through this again here. So what we're looking at now is the end product of all the modeling that happens. And this is estimates of relative abundance for every week of the year for wood thrush. So relative abundance is the estimated number of individuals that would be detected by an eBirder during a traveling count at the optimal time of day to maximize detection for a species. That is a mouthful, and I can unpack that if anybody's interested. But this is just one of the status and trends products. Here we have a static map showing the average abundance or relative abundance by season. And each season is defined by
a different color. So the breeding season is red, the winter season is blue. It's can be a useful visualization to understand. Oh, I see Orrin moving here.
my back.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was going to say these breeding seasons are defined by species experts. So they're not just generic non-breeding season or breeding season. They are specific to each one of the species in here. We can look at each season on its own, but also look at the range map, right? This is just the range boundary for each season where the species is estimated to occur at least an encounter rate of 5% for at least a week within that season. We also have trend data. So what we're looking at here is the trend map for wood thrush. This is an old example. New trends will be out hopefully soon. We have a paper that the new trends will be coming out with that new paper. So this is the trend for wood thrush. It's the average annual percent change in relative abundance from 2007 to 2016. each dot represents a 25 by 25 kilometer.
Yeah, we lost you, Orrin, or you broke up. I don't know if Jenna, you can fill in. I think
Yeah.
we're going to move to questions in just a couple of minutes.
Yeah. So each dot represents a 25 by 25 kilometer square. Red indicates areas where a species is declining. Blue are areas where a species is increasing in population. Oh, great. Orrin's about to explain how well these trends do compared to some existing surveys. So some previous large-scale community surveys that have assessed population trends, such as the Breeding Bird Survey, the BBS. And so how well these trends do. The Ebird trends tend to agree very well with the BBS trends and are equally valuable, but in some ways provide a unique visual perspective for these products.
Am I back?
Yep. Go ahead.
All right. So I also wanted to point out quickly before I lose it again, that these trend maps can be useful for land trusts. You can essentially look and say, am I in one of these big red dots, right? That would let you know that this is a species that's declining in your area. Maybe you use this in a grant to show that this is a focal species and it's declining. We need some support to help turn that around. So that's one of the ways you could look at these maps. And I will run through this with the North American Breeding Bird Survey comparison to Ebird. All of this to say that we compare very well with BBS. And Jenna showed, this. So you would go to the Ebird status and trends page. Jenna showed you how to get here. From here, you can click this green button, the Explore All Status and Trend Species, and you'll come to a series of tiles. There are 807, I believe we decided yesterday. And you click on a tile and you can get all of that information that I was showing you. Am I still with you?
Yes.
Oh, good. Jenna also mentioned that you can download a lot of this stuff in R using the Ebird ST package. And within that, you can see a lot more than we can put on the website. You can see the credible intervals, the predictive performance metrics, the habitat associations, and there's lots of potential for interactive visualizations and stuff online. Because my internet was not cooperating today, I'm going to skip to the end so we have time for questions. One example I wanted to show came from last week. Joan from Maine, black ducks. So I pulled the black duck data. You may be looking here and saying, well, black ducks should be on the coast. And you're absolutely right. The mapping in R, when you translate it to a picture from R, everything jumps a little bit. So these dots should be a little further south, and they are in the data. Show the kind of thing. So this is the relative abundance of American black ducks in Maine during the second week of April. And Joan, I don't know what counties you work in, or I could have gotten it down to the county level for you. But you can also look at something like this too. So this is the relative abundance or the expected count that we talked about. If you just dropped an average eBirder into a spot in Maine, this is how many black ducks that person would count for every week of the year. So we start here in January and go throughout. So that's, we can get the trajectory of black ducks. And then we can also plot whichever week or weeks are of interest on a map like this, all using that data downloaded there. So that's that. Are there any questions? And hopefully I'll stay on long enough to answer them if there are.
Thanks, Orrin, and thanks, Jenna. I feel free to post a question in chat, or you can unmute and ask it yourself. Might be helpful to use the raise your hand function, and we can just call on you. It looks like someone did post where can we access metadata descriptions behind the status and trends? And Jenna, it looks like you answered that with the link online or with the link.
Yeah. And for those who are maybe watching this recording later and don't have access to that chat, if you're looking for some of the more technical information underlying the status and trends data, like 5% detection probabilities, the definition of relative abundance, what BCRs mean, that sort of stuff. If you head over to ebird.org, click science, and then click status and trends, there's an FAQ page that provides a really solid foundation of the technical information so that you can interpret and understand these products. Orrin, is there a particular article, publication, or another resource that might be helpful for folks who really need the nitty-gritty details of the metadata?
I think he may have dropped off again. I know the benefits and realities of Zoom and meeting from everywhere across the Northeast. So thanks for bearing with us, everybody. Maybe we'll put a pin in that question for just a second until he can join us back. But any other questions? I know I see several folks that I know that lead RCPs in the region or throughout the Northeast and work with a lot of partners, do strategic planning for your agencies. Yeah, oh, here's a bird question.
John has a bird question. So tricolored blackbirds and red-winged blackbirds are, to a casual glance, very similar. It can be very hard to tell them apart, especially the females. Tricolored blackbirds have a bright white check covering their red epaulette, whereas red-winged blackbirds have a yellowish or a buffy color. The red on the shoulder of the tricolored blackbird is also a much darker, almost maroon or wine color, whereas the epaulette of a red-winged blackbird tends to be strawberry red or bright crimson to me. The shape of the bill is also different. Tricolored blackbirds have a much sharper, more acute bill. The females, really hard to tell apart, but from my experience, tricolored females tend to be cool gray. They lack some of those warm brown tones that female redwings have, which tend to be more of a bright brown.
Yeah, tricoloreds are pointier, is how it was put to me. When I first went out to California to look for them, you would see a field of 400 or so mixed blackbirds, and there would be one tricolored in there, and it's almost impossible for me to pick out. But I got better at it. But in flight, they're much pointier. Is the advice I was given.
Jenna, do you want to ask Orrin your question again?
Oh yeah, Orrin, while you're on, other than the FAQ on the status and trends page, what are some good resources for folks who need the metadata? They're using status and trends and they need information about how they were generated.
Yeah, so there is a paper coming out soon on that, on the methods and the data that goes in there. For now, I send people to the FAQ where they can find the you can find the data sets that go in. But yeah, we are working on a formal data paper that will explain all of that.
I see Jordy's got a question about ways of custom defining a geographic area and pulling all of the records. When it comes to Ebird Raw Data, as I mentioned earlier, the smallest geographic area that you can download records for is a county. And from there, you'll need to further subset the records to a custom region yourself. Our database doesn't have the capacity to process every custom geographic request that comes through at the moment. So there are ways to do that. You could download all the data for a county and filter it by a single location, a minimum and maximum latitude and longitude to get a square, or if you have some basic geospatial knowledge, you could have a polygon or an outline of your survey area and clip all of the Ebird Raw data observations to that polygon. I know that's possible in several geospatial programs, but those are right now the most common and easiest ways to get raw Ebird data for a specific custom region.
It's the same with status and trends. You get it all when you download it, and then you can clip it to a state or country or county or your own shape file. It's the same there.
Lorraine, oh yeah, go for it, Katie.
Yeah, no, she has a really great question, and she's in Rhode Island, where I know, and many of you know, they have a lot of dead trees. They got hit by the gypsy moth pretty bad. She's asking any suggestions on a good systematic way to get started on collecting bird data during this phase of regeneration.
Yeah, I think as Orrin mentioned, the Ebird status and trends uses a specific subset of the Ebird database. The Ebird database is huge. That's one of the values, is there is a lot of data, which means that you can subset those data to meet specific criteria while still having a lot of data to use, so that you're not scarce on data. So what the Ebird status and trends does is they filter the entire Ebird database to records and checklists that kind of align with what a professional survey might look like. Orrin, can you quickly go over what criteria you use when selecting a checklist for Ebird status and trends?
Yeah, it's man, that we have written papers on this. It's that complicated, but the gist of it is, you don't want checklists where people travel too far, because then the spatial accuracy starts to get poor. Same thing with time, right? Time of day can be a huge, or can have a huge impact on your detection. So people who birded for 10 hours or did a big sit or something like that, we can't use those because we don't know when in that 10 or 12 hours you saw a given bird. So we limit the time of, or we limit the distance traveled and time spent birding because of those things. And then there are several statistical tests we can do to help tune the models to select the optimal criteria for each species. And these aren't just plug and play. They are geared towards each species to the best we can. But those are just kind of on the surface, some high level things that immediately get done.
Yeah, and I think those principles can apply to any survey design, whether you're encouraging volunteers to go out and collect data, or you're going to be using existing raw Ebird data, the raw Ebird data set, is to try and aim for data that are limited in duration and distance. The more precise you can get, the better you can associate the birds that are detected with particular environmental conditions. So encourage your volunteers to go to a stationary point, or encourage the public to keep their lists under an hour, that sort of thing, or filter the raw Ebird data by those same criteria. In terms of systematic surveys, try and get some, if you're thinking point counts or transects or that sort of thing, you can do those, and then also have eBirders kind of encourage them or use the data in the same way. Repeated surveys are always helpful. Trying to be consistent about the time of day that people are doing things, going about stuff in a very easily repeatable and manner is, I think, helpful. Sarah, do you have any more thoughts on that?
Yes, my other thought is that you could potentially, I'm not sure if you're looking to just get started, you haven't done any of these sort of systematic surveys in the past before, you could set up a series of hotspots on your land trust property, preserve, whatever it may be, and then advertise. This is essentially advertised to the greater Ebird community, and then people within that area that want to go birding, that are birders, will see that these hotspots exist and will come start collecting data at these points, these hotspot points, and this will populate data for you and collect data for you on behalf of your land trust. So if that's something where you don't necessarily have the staffing capacity to be able to go out and collect the data, this is a good way. Setting up a series of hotspots is a good way for you to be able to start. And I might suggest that you do set up hotspots in different habitat types, because then you can better assess any sort of management if that happens in the future.
I would also add to that, encourage people to do multiple short checklists. That's one way to make sure their data is usable and gets used in any using Ebird data. So, you know, a series of 10 to 15 minute point counts rather than one really long list.
We have time for about one more question, and I see a comment from Andy, and maybe Jenna, Orrin, or Sarah could comment on this. It's kind of a neat suggestion about a function in Ebird that elevates things to the sort of research grade, where the eBirder entering, you know, wants to make the Ebird data more usable, and wondering if that's something that you've all thought about or considered or tried.
No, it's a great idea. Yeah, and we really appreciate the feedback and ideas like that. How to incentivize and encourage best practices and get people excited about collecting data that is more valuable for science is something that our whole team spends a lot of time thinking about, and we're happy to try as much as we can to get the public excited about collecting science quality data.
Yeah, and that's also where we're hoping to rely on all of you through these, you know, webinar series. Is we're hoping to sort of give you the tools and help start to give you the tools to be able to then go out and either teach, you know, your own eBird webinar to your community, or be able to spread the word through maybe, you know, when you go out birding with a group of people, say on your land trust, on your preserve, or if you post something online on your website preserve, you can post a bit about eBird best practices. And these resources are things that we are going to be sending out to all of you shortly, with some tips and tricks about how to teach, but also the best things that, you know, you can help disseminate to your communities when birding.
And that's a perfect segue. Thank you, Sarah. I want to respect everybody's time, and I want to thank you for attending today, and also if you were with us last week. As Sarah said, I'll be emailing everyone who registered. We have a toolkit and resources, so on leading your own workshops, tips and tricks, URLs that were shared during both presentations very soon. So following this webinar, we'll get that out to you in recordings. I know some people couldn't make it today. We will have mini grants available in early 2022, which is crazy to say. It was just 2020. So stay tuned. I'll email again the folks that registered for this, as well as our greater RCP list of availability for these mini grants to run your own eBird workshops with your partnerships. And save the date. If this is a program of interest to you, this 4-part Forestry for the Birds webinar, that's coming later in September and early October. And again, more will be coming out on that soon. And if you're interested in getting involved with the Northeast Bird Habitat Conservation Initiative, please reach out to myself or Sarah. We would love more people involved in this initiative. And I hope you get out this spring to do some eBird or just to bird. Thanks so much for joining us today. Take care.